Alrighty, guys, and welcome back to the Basketball Fix podcast. Now, we're continuing on with our one-on-ones, and I've got a very special guest to everyone. You can see him on the screen. Young entrepreneur, I guess we can call him, and podcast host and everything going on. I'm looking forward to breaking down everything that he's done so far in his very short and young career. But I'm speaking of Sporting Max Becker. Max, welcome to the show, mate.
Josh, thanks so much for having on. Stoked, absolutely love your pod, and thanks so much for having me on.
Nah, very much. Thank you, mate. And it's very much going back to you as well. Absolutely loving what you're doing. You're doing an incredible amount of work, mate. And I'm looking forward to it. We'll dive into it straight away. But I want to know first and foremost, how old were you when you started the podcast? And you do a bit of work for SEN. You're obviously doing a lot of things for the NBL as well, mate. You are an absolutely busy man. But tell us when you started the podcast, when you started working with SEN, and tell us a little bit about your history of being a podcast host.
Yeah, so I started Sporting Max just back in COVID, really, 2020, around that. I was only 13 years old, so just started off with, a couple of guys that I sort of knew, which Lee Jecker, who he won an Germany's National League MVP, and a grand final MVP over there, and he won a championship under Joey Wright at the Brisbane Bullets. So I just sort of started off with him. And then, his best mate was, the head scout of the Boston Celtics, Benes Makavicius, who's been phenomenal. So after those two, it kind of just really snowballed from there. And, I guess it took off a little bit, and then Steel Side Bottom and things like that in terms of AFL. And once I sort of got to episode 50, I had some pretty big names, Mark Howard, that kind of thing. And I was able to lock in Craig Hutchison for episode 50, which I was absolutely stoked about. I remember emailing him one day, and I thought, he's never going to get back to me. And I had to go to the footy one night, and I had an interview with Kobe Bryant's personal security guard, John Stern, that morning in a city in Melbourne. So after that, got home, checked my phone, and, there's never usually on my iCloud email, there's never usually I don't use it much. So it was the first time I've used it. And there was just this little red one dot. I thought, who could this be? It's got to be a spam email. Surely enough, it was Craig Hutchison emailing me back going, "Hey, Max, love what you're doing. Love to jump on the pod." And I think he was pretty surprised, or I guess shocked, you could say, when, he sort of jumped on with this 14-year-old kid. And, he's not just I'm not just asking him one-word questions or one-word answers and things like that. And I think that one thing that really sort of caught him by surprise was I asked him, I remember this pretty clearly, I asked him about the merger between Sports and Entertainment Network, Pacific Star Network, and SEN. That was sort of when Hutchie took over Croc Media. And Pacific Star and SEN and all that kind of thing, and his mouth just kind of dropped for a sec. George just kind of dropped because he was on a long weekend family holiday with his stepson and his wife, so he's not expecting any of this. So after that, he mentioned me a couple of times in his sounding board podcast with Damien Barrett and things like that, which I was amazed by that. And around about November, I emailed his assistant Amanda, and I said, if there's any opportunities, I'd love to just help out with that, pressing buttons, running coffees, all that kind of thing. And she got back to me going, "Hey, Max, obviously, we get a lot of these kind of emails, and that's pretty banked up." And I said, "All right, no worries." So I stayed quiet for a month. I left that. I sort of put my head down and got to work on, I guess, a bit of a pitch on what I wanted to do and what I wanted to bring to the table for SEN and what I could give to them in return for airtime or whatnot. So I ended up, I just emailed Hutchie directly, just no one else. And I just said, "Hey, Hutchie, look, I've got 10 episodes of Sporting Max lined up, high-profile guests, the biggest and best business entrepreneurs in the world, some of the best sports stars you'll ever see and ever meet. And I've got 10 sponsors lined up for each shot, $500 a show. And all I want for this is, Sporting Max to be on the SEN app." So he loved that. He forwarded that to Sam Thompson, who's the national radio director at SEN. She's absolutely phenomenal. And we set up a meeting, last week of December, before everyone went on holidays in what was that? That was end of 2021. And she goes, "Max," she goes, "I'll listen to your stuff." She goes, "We'll give you an hour of Sporting Max on SEN every Sunday." And I was completely stoked and amazed by that. And after the first few Sporting Max episodes in 2022, I think the first three were Sean Bruce, Sydney Kings, Dory Kadar, who at that point in time was Illawarra Hawks CEO and owner, and now he's just doing some huge things within basketball that he's got coming up, which are private. But anyway, so I had those two to start off with. And then I get a call start of March, and Sam said, "Max, I'm loving what you're doing. We're all loving what you're doing at the moment. We want to give you a live show. Ultimately, that's called the Kids Edition every Sunday morning." So I've been doing that for last 3 years now, I've had to dig myself into the commercial side of it too, which has been, I guess, a lot of fun learning, the sales and marketing side. I've had to chase sponsors for the show. I think I've sold 20 weeks of sponsorship at a grand per show, which has been, pretty crazy for me, having meetings with some big clients and big corporate companies and just learning, as a 16, 17-year-old kid, how to deal with these companies and negotiations and things like that. It's been a pretty invaluable experience.
Oh, mate, that's unbelievable. And I guess that's sort of the goal for all these sort of things. And to start it at such a young age, and you're still so young, I still can't believe your age right now and what you've achieved, and you're talking numbers and you're spitting all that stuff out just off the top of your head, mate. It's truly incredible. And like, I want to go into this one question here, and I was going to ask this a bit later on in the show, but it just seems the right time to ask when we're talking about your age and everything you've experienced. But Scott Roth, halfway through the NBL season, there's a viral clip going around where he was just bemused by the questions you were asking him. And even JC, Jordan Crawford, was just sat there going, what on earth is going on here? Is this a kid? Is this an adult? No one had any idea what was going on. And Scott felt so, I guess, passionate about it. He actually genuinely asked you how old you were and gave you a quote along the lines of, we've seen some kids in here. We've seen plenty of kids in here, but none of them have been as good as you. Now, that is such a great endorsement, obviously, to the stuff that you're doing and you have been doing. And you sat down with Scott about a month later after that little press conference there and had a big conversation with him. And that was massive in terms of the NBL media world and obviously yourself jumping in there with Scott, because he doesn't do too many interviews, does he?
No, so that was hilarious. I've had a couple of different interactions with like coaches and press conferences. I've been part of the NBL media and press and things like that for, the last 4 seasons. So really since I was 14, 15. Which is pretty crazy to think. Anyway, so this season, I've never had an interaction, never seen Scott before. First time sort of seeing him in a presser. And I was really nervous about, what's he going to be like? How am I going to come across to him? All that kind of thing. Anyway, so we jumped in and I just asked him a few questions, he mentioned a couple of different things about, the guys sort of deciding on how they go about, like, the guys purely make the decisions at timeout. So I guess I asked JC, can you take us inside, those timeouts? And Scott said, you guys are making the decisions. Well, how do you actually come to those decisions as a group, without a coach in there? And, he gave a great answer to that, did JC. And then I asked Scott, can you take us inside three-quarter time where things sort of really started to turn around? Melbourne United really started to put on an aggressive offensive attack that Tassie ultimately weren't able to handle. And and then when Scott sort of called me out, I just thought, wow, it's pretty incredible just to get that recognition from someone like Scott. And I remember we were talking just before this. So Crystal Diaz, the head of media at Tassie, she hit me up straight after that going, Max, that was amazing. Like, you're killing it. And so I thought, all right, like, I've just got to like stay calm on this for a sec. So about a month later or 2 weeks later or something, I sent Crystal a message. I said, hey, Crystal, I know, I'm probably not much of a chance here, but it's worth asking and it's worth a shot. Look, these are the podcast numbers. These are the guests I've had over the last, 4 years or whatever, 180 guests I've had. I'd really love to get Scott on for an interview. A lot of people generally forget that, Scott played 180 games in the NBA, played against the Lakers when he was playing for Utah in, a 5-game semi-final or playoff series, over there, which is pretty phenomenal for just a kid from Ohio. And now he's coaching the Tassie Jackrabbits. I said, look, it'll be purely about his career, his journey. And obviously Scott really he hates talking about the championship from last year, and he hates talking about this season or anything that's in the past or future or things like that. So I said, look, it's purely going to be about his career, his journey, things like that. And she said, all right, she said, I can't promise anything, but she sent a message to Scott, and Scott within 24 hours said yes. And she called me, she goes, Max, I actually can't believe this. She goes, but I've had requests from everyone this season, Herald Sun and stuff, and he's just refused and said no to absolutely everyone. But he said yes to you to do an interview. And so I thought, wow, that's massive. And I thought, then my mind started thinking, how can I get the most out of this interview? And obviously I'm Melbourne based. So I'm like, well, Tassie aren't going to be going to be in Melbourne. So I booked a couple of flights over to Tassie, the Monday after, and went into Jackie's HQ, and just Scott really started to open up after about 5 or so minutes. Talking about his childhood. I think he lost his younger sister and his mother at a really young age too. So he started to open up about, how that impacted his life. And, I think he said something along the lines of, he just used basketball as his escape. He just used to go outside every day after school and just shoot, because it's the only way he could really get outside his house. So, the grief that was going on around him and his surroundings, his family, which was a pretty incredible story. And then, the NBA and things like that. And then we very briefly touched on the championship and got his thoughts on Jack McVeigh's Game 3 winner. He was very, very brief and very quick on that, but I was stoked that I could get something out of him on that. But yeah, Scott was phenomenal. And in fact, when was it? It was the Saturday before that. Southeast played Tassie at the State Basketball Centre, and Scott Roth walks into the presser afterwards. He goes, "I hear you coming down to Tassie." I said, "All right." I said, "I can't wait, mate." He goes, "I can't wait either." He goes, "You better be good." Which was phenomenal. And then to follow that up, the second presser that night was Josh King, who I'd say I've got a half decent relationship with since he first walked in. I'll chat to him, before and after every presser. He's an incredible dude as well. He goes, "Max," he goes, "where have you been the last month?" I said, "Max, you guys have been on a road stint for 3 weeks." He goes, "Yeah." He goes, "You haven't been at the last 2 SBC games." I said, "I was told that there was no media allocation left and that it was all exhausted." He goes, "Man," he goes, "Are you going to be at every single other game this season?" I said, "I'll be at every single other game this season apart from and playoffs." He goes, "Good." He goes, "I want you there."
That's awesome. That's unreal. It's just
it's pretty incredible to have, some of these interactions and things like that are, in the moment pretty surreal.
No, definitely. I think that's also. I just want to shout out that episode with Scott. I listened to that episode, and it was an incredible episode, and you got to see the raw nature in which Scott was talking about. And every man and his dog has tried to reach out to the Tasmanian Jack Jumpers, and also a massive shout out to Crystal as well. She's doing an incredible job there at the Tasmanian Jack Jumpers, and is still continuing to do that as well. And we've had a good relationship the last couple of weeks, as you'll see over the next couple of weeks. Plenty of Tasmanian Jack Jumpers coming on the show, but Scott's an incredible character. He's an incredible guy, but he just doesn't want to speak too much about himself, because it's that old school mantra, I guess you could say, in which it's not about me, it's about the success of everything else. So for you to crack that first and foremost, to have a bit of fun with him as well, and also produce an incredible episode, kudos to you, my friend. That was an incredible thing. I had to shout it out. I think it was a nice little spot to do it as well off the top of the show, because I think most people around the NBL had heard of you, but to see that from Scott at the press conference, then to see the backup with the interview, it really did put you on this scale of, wow, this kid's going to go places for sure. But let's get back into talking about some of the podcasts as well. Now, we've seen, like you said, you've had some incredible guests. I've seen plenty and plenty of clips on your social medias and everything like that. Listen to multiple different episodes as well. This is a tough question, mate, but who's been your favorite guest and why?
I've had so many over the last 4 or 5 years. One that probably really sticks out is Jared Waitley. When I first walked into SEN, first year at SEN 2022, it was a Thursday night. He walked in and I was almost shitting myself. I was so nervous because Jared Waitley, I absolutely idolized him. He's the pinnacle in terms of AFL and sports media of really where I want to get to. As a broadcaster, commentator, journalist, and that kind of thing, reporter. And so I just remember standing there waiting for him. And I know he only had 45 minutes to an hour, and AFL Nation, he had to broadcast on AFL Nation in studio after that on a Thursday night. And he walks around the corner, and, he puts down his apple and banana that he's got for later and his bottle of water. And he goes, "Hi, Max, I'm Jared Waitley." And I'm like, my goodness, far out. This is just incredible. Like, what am I doing here? And so anyway, we went on to do a phenomenal interview that got probably the highest broadcast reach that I've had or had so far to that point in time. And yeah, Jared was just phenomenal with his time, and I guess post that he's been incredible and just mentoring me, I guess, a little bit through what to do. And I guess I love just to sit in. A couple of times I've sat in and just watched and listened to his 3-hour shows, and just the whole production of it and his preparation is just absolutely incredible.
No, definitely is. He's obviously a legend, and I watch a lot of football as well, and he is a guy who seems to be everywhere, and he's had an extensive career, like you mentioned there, mate. So I think you're bang on. But you cover a lot of different sports, and obviously covering athletes, that does happen because you've got such a wide reach nowadays as well with how incredibly you started and everything like that. What is your favourite sport? to cover. You know, you've obviously got the NBL, the AFL, the cricket, the rugby, everything in Australia, but there's obviously things that you've done externally out of Australia. But if you were to pick one sport that you'd love to pursue a career in full time, what would it be?
I think it's really important as a broadcaster and, you know, media person these days that you have to have a really versatile skill set and not just specialize in one sport. So for me, I've tried to really specialize in three, that being footy, basketball, and cricket. I try not to have them, you know, ordered in terms of my favorite or things like that. I try and have a, you know, broad knowledge of everything that's going on at every single moment in time, whether that be, you know, through an Ashes series, through a Border Gavaskar series, in the cricket through an NBL season or footy season, and that kind of thing. Externally, outside of that, in terms of, you know, global sports, probably the Olympics. The Olympics is around there too. So, you know, I've had a couple of gold medalists from the Olympics last year and things like that. Matt Horton, Grace Brownie won a gold medal in the cycling. And then obviously Matt Hauser, who's an exceptional triathlete. I think he's world number 2 at the moment. He's got the World Triathlon Championships coming up in Wollongong in September this year, which I'm trying to get out to for him, which would be insane if I can actually get there. But yeah, really for me, it's just every sport is, you know, none's higher than the other. I need to have a versatile skill set in each sport. And I mean, looking at the NBA, that's probably where I want to most likely end up, somewhere within that US sports media landscape.
Yeah, definitely, man. I think that's the way to go. And definitely it's an interesting perspective there for sure. I think that's a massive lesson for a lot of people, you know, and depending on what you're doing, it really does depend on how you focus on multiple different sports. And you've nailed it there. You know, it's not about just honing in on one completely, or, you know, you can do that to a certain degree, but just make sure you have a solid basis. So if something does obviously come up, you have got a multiple different things to do. And especially with the stuff that you're doing with SEN as well, mate, that's super, super important. But what are some of the opportunities that may be on the horizon? Because the AFL season is just around the corner. We know SEN has huge ties to some massive TV broadcasters as well. Is there any works maybe potentially in the near future where you could be seeing yourself on a Channel 7, a Channel 9, something like that? Or is that stuff a little bit further on down the track still?
Not at this stage, not for this year, at least for me. It's just looking at, you know, a couple of little different partnerships that I can put together potentially with Sporting Max and SEN, and how that will kind of look like from a commercial standpoint, in terms of, you know, a mutually beneficial partnership. In terms of, you know, the TV stuff, I was talking to Simon Strahan, the CEO of Drink Wise, a couple of weeks ago. He said, look, everyone knows the voice. He said, everyone knows the name. He goes, but people, you know, like, don't have a face to put to that voice and that name. He said, I think once, you know, you've got a face to put to that voice and that name, he goes, you'll just grow in even more leaps and bounds. So for me, that TV is really, I guess, sort of the next step for me. And that's going to come off, you know, the back of social channels growth on Insta, TikTok, all that kind of thing, as well. So it's just to continue working on that for now. And hopefully, my aim's over the next 12 months, to, you know, 12 to 15 months, within 12 to 15 months, ultimately I want to be, whether that's, you know, courtside reporting on an NBL broadcast, or, you know, boundary writing for SEN or boundary writing for Fox or Channel 7. That's my sort of end goal over the next 12 to 15 months. And it's really sort of just working on my craft to get myself up to that level.
No, definitely, mate. And I guess we've been so young. This was a question that really triggered a few things in my head, because there's obviously, I think, some people discredit things and they go, oh, he's young and he had a chance just because he's that kid. You know what I mean? And they don't really look too far. You see it all the time. There's kids who come out left, right, and center, and people go, oh, yeah, I could be doing that. But, you know, and it's a genuine stigma that it really pisses me off to say. But what were some of the challenges early on?
It's this and that. Yeah.
Exactly right. And what were some of the challenges, though, early on? Because sometimes there is that stigma there as well, but there's also the other thing where they're a little bit too tentative. You know, teams, if you're reaching out for interviews, or people, if they're reaching out interviews, a little bit tentative to go with a 13-year-old kid who is just starting out. You know, like sponsorships, which you've spoken about. What have been some of the biggest challenges that have gotten you to where you are today, which, you know, were quite a challenge at that sort of time? I'm trying to word that question the right way, because it's an interesting thing for sure.
Yeah, I think the stigma around nepotism and things like that can be, you know, surreal. But for me, I didn't have that challenge. Like, we didn't have a lot of money. At the time, we were living in a beach shack. Dad was trying to, you know, just work away on our sort of family concreting business and maintenance business, and just, you know, have enough money so we can hopefully build, you know, our dream home on a half decent block of land. And so that's when really I started the podcast and helping out dad and things like that. But it was a lot of fun to really start. I didn't have that challenge of nepotism or things like that. My biggest challenge has been over the last few years dealing with media managers of different clubs and things like that. So when I initially first started out Sporting Max, I don't know if I can go into this detail or not, but we'll give it a roll of the dice anyway. When I first started Sporting Max, I just reached out to the athlete, the coach. So one of the first people I reached out to was Dean Vickerman, the head coach of Melbourne United. And he got back to me and said, yeah, Max, like, no worries. So we just did that interview, no problems. I reached out to Joe Luala-Tua, Melbourne United. And then, I got an email maybe a week later from Tom Vandervoos, who's now the marketing manager at Melbourne United. He goes, hey, Max, like, just run this sort of by us first. We don't really want you sort of just going and directly talking to players and coaches and things like that. Which for me at the time, I was like, okay, like, that's no worries. Like, at least I didn't know that prior. I know that now and I can go through use now. So that was probably one of the biggest challenges. But yeah, for me, I think between the media and players and athletes and coaches, you look at the US and and Hutchie talks about this all the time, and how they do it within the NFL. There's 15 minutes post-game, every game where media can roam and, build those relationships with players, build those relationships with coaches. In the NBA, media are allowed in the locker rooms. It's building those relationships with players and coaches that are really essential in allowing players to open up. And within NBL and AFL particularly, that's really, really strict in terms of, when are you as a broadcaster or sports media person allowed to interact with that player or that coach and things like that. So that's probably been one of the challenges that I've had. I love just, engaging, chatting to guys, whether that be, just over text on socials or, in person at games, pre-game, post-game. But yeah, but then it's also building that relationship, and you need that trust. You need the, media manager or assistant or things like that to trust in what you're doing, and that obviously you're not breaking any guidelines or things like that, because these things are all, prior and already set out in rules.
Yeah, it's such a tough one, mate, because I'm on the same boat of you. I still reach out to players. Obviously, I've got good relationships with majority of the media managers in the NBL, but I still think the best way is to reach out to the player, see if there's any initial interest, and then you go from there to a media manager, because you want to know if they even want to do it. You don't want to just reach out willy-nilly and obviously then find out that they don't want to do it, and you sat there going, okay, cool, let's go to another player. But it's such a tough one, because
if the player, even knows who you are or something like that. Yeah.
Exactly right. And it's also tough because you raised a good point about the American sports stuff. And I'd love to see that over here, because things like, I watch a lot of ESPN shows or Fox Sports shows like First Take, for example, with Stephen A. Smith, and, all those shows in which are daily shows, they talk about American sports. And I don't think, and I can't see the Australian sports landscape getting to that point unless we're playing games from Monday to Sunday. But there is still a chance for some more TV shows in between the Monday to Friday time slots before the games are on the weekend, where they can be a little bit more critical. Because one thing that I do see in Australian media is when you criticize somebody, and there's two ways of criticizing. There's constructive criticism, and then there's going for their head. The going for the head I don't agree with, but the constructive criticism I think is something that the Australian media landscape in terms of sporting 100% needs to be a little bit more open to, because it's not about criticizing the player necessarily. It's about creating some viral clips in which we gain some more international viewership. You see First Take, you see Stephen A. Smith, you see all these guys going crazy about LeBron James or Micah Parsons in the NFL or any of these top players around the world, and it gains eyes from the entire universe.
Kane Corns comes in.
Exactly right, and that's the thing. Kane gets criticised for doing that, and that's where I'd like to see the little slight shift. I know Kane says some absolute bonkers stuff, and I've had some questionable things about Kane, but is he right more times than wrong? I think he is. So I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see, obviously, how the media landscape shifts between that American sort of feel to what we've currently got now, because I think that's how we grow our leagues worldwide. I think we're so scared to grow worldwide, where we'd rather just stay our own little bubble and just look after our own 27 million people or whatever we've got in Australia, and not really branch out to that next level. But, mate, let's get into NBL 25, because most people at the Basketball Fix are here because of NBL basketball. It's an amazing sort of fan base that we've got building here, mate. And obviously a lot of them have seen your face and have seen you floating around on NBL circles. But NBL 25, mate, what a season it's been. I think obviously NBL 24, it was starting to build. It's been building for the past, God knows, 5 to 10 years now to the point where it is right now. But what are some of your thoughts and some of the key takeaways from NBL 25?
Just so much. I mean, it's been a phenomenal season so far, hasn't it? I mean, the quota of every moment matters really is no more truer than NBL 24 and now NBL 25 even more so. Every point, every bucket, every moment matters to your whole season. And for me, the story of the season is looking at the Southeast Melbourne Phoenix going from 0-5 to Josh King and Sammy Mack. I mean, Sammy Mack did a phenomenal job in those 3 games that he kind of took over. I remember coming into the presser, I know Sammy pretty well, and he walked in and he was just drenched in Gatorade and things like that after he got that first W with the guys. But Josh King's done an incredible job taking over, and it's got to be the story of the season so far. That or Justin Tatum and taking Illawarra to the top of the table in 25 years.
It's crazy. Yeah, it's definitely, there's been some incredible stories. I think you're bang on. I think those 2 storylines are absolutely incredible. And, I think it's one of those things in which have taken the whole media landscape by surprise to a certain degree. We're talking about the Southeast Melbourne Phoenix as now a genuine contender. And there was a patch there towards the back end of the year where they were probably the hottest team in the NBL. They were winning game after game after game. And, other teams around them were starting to fall. Obviously, the loss to the Wildcats sort of halted their momentum a little bit coming into the NBL playoffs. But they're looking really good, mate. Now, you're heading to the game today. We'll go here now because you speak of the Phoenix. Heading to the game today with, as a recording, Southeast Melbourne Phoenix will be taking on the Adelaide 36ers this afternoon. Who wins this game and why? Because this is an intriguing matchup. I think Adelaide have got a lot more top-end depth, but obviously the Southeast Melbourne Phoenix have got the likes of Owen Foxwell, Angus Glover, Thomas Vodanovich, all those young guys and obviously experienced guys coming off the bench for them, which may help. Yeah,
this is a game for me, which is going to be incredible. It's that defensive mindset from Josh King, where it's really going to come into play against, an offensive-minded Mike Wells, who's, come from the NBA off, a decade or so in the NBA. And he's got these absolute superstars who you can just throw them the ball and they're going to make a play and make a bucket every single time. I mean, Montrezl Harrell is the one for me that really scares me, and I guess you'd say everyone else within the NBL about what level he can get to within the NBL playoffs. If you're Southeast Melbourne, you don't want to be versing Adelaide. But, you've put yourself in this situation. Adelaide have lost, I think they've played 3 games at John Cain Arena this season against Melbourne United and the Southeast Melbourne Phoenix. They've lost by 15 plus or 20 plus points every single time they've been here at Melbourne at John Cain. So it hasn't been a pleasant time for Mike Wells and his Adelaide 36ers. But, I've got a feeling that, they get the job done today just by the energy that Montrezl Harrell brings. And, he's copped a whole lot of criticism this season. But, the NBL needs someone like Montrez to bring eyeballs to the league and bring that entertainment and things like that, which, as do all sports need.
Yeah, I think he's bringing the international viewership in which we spoke about that normally the NBL, the media landscapes do drive. He's bringing that from just a pure presence standpoint as well. So he's been incredible. I think I'm on a similar vein of you, mate. I think the Adelaide 36ers win today. And there's no other reason than just Kendrick Davis and Montrezl Harrell. That 1-2-man combination is just, it's probably the best in the league in terms of an offensive standpoint. I know they've got their questions defensively. If you go look into the data and everything as well, they are quite poor defensive players, but so is the whole Adelaide 36ers team at this stage. But it's going to be an incredible game, mate, and I'm sure we'll see you floating around the sidelines there as well. But now this is a hard one. So I'll start off by telling you this from my perspective. Now, from a professional standpoint, I don't think it's a good thing to a certain degree to let people know what your favorite team is, right? Because people do criticize the whole favoritism thing and everything like that. But I've got a bit of a different viewpoint here where I let people know who my favorite team is, but I am also probably the most critical player or critical person of that particular team and those players.
Yeah, definitely.
Because I want to see them succeed. Now, I'm a Perth Wildcats fan. I grew up in WA. I still live here in WA as well. And I have been super critical of the Perth Wildcats for the entire time that I've had the Basketball Fix going. Do you follow an NBL team exclusively, or are you just more of the van of, I just love the NBL as a whole product?
I love the whole product, definitely, of the NBL. I'm also Southeast Melbourne Phoenix just because of the relationships I've got there. Someone like Josh King, Sammy Mack, and all the players and things like that. But where that comes in today, like I mentioned before, against Adelaide, I mean, you've got someone like Owen Foxwell who's, just going to grind it out defensively. You've still got that one general playmaker in Matt Hurt who you could just give him the ball and he's going to go make a play as well. So Southeast could still well and truly be in that today. But yeah, if I had to pick one team, it'd only just be Southeast Melbourne. But yeah, as like you said, I'm more critical of them than anyone else.
Exactly right. I think it's an interesting dynamic in which people can be a bit more open about because, like I said, mate, you're 100% more critical of your own team if they don't perform, and when they do perform, I don't think you're as quick to give them, the praise as you would other teams. Yeah. So that's sort of my experiences with it all anyways. But we've seen some incredible players in NBL 25, the likes of Bryce Cotton, Kendrick Davis, Matt Hurt, which you mentioned before, Montrezl Harrell, the returns of guys like Xavier Cooks and Cam Oliver to the league. There has been a plethora of superstar players this season. Who has been the top three players, do you think, off the top of your head for NBL 25?
Bryce Cotton by a country mile, obviously. Do you think he's going to stay in Australia or head over to the big office in Japan?
I think he's going to go unless they win a championship. That's the way I read the room. He hasn't committed. I am not set on, him staying right now. I know the stigma around John Rillie and their relationship is a thing that everyone speaks about. I don't think that's as prevalent as what people think it is. I think it's either championship or bust for Bryce Cotton. But what about you, mate? What is your thoughts?
I think it's a flip of the coin at the moment. I love that take. It's championship or bust for Bryce, and he's out. Realistically, you can't see him being in another NBL jersey other than Perth. I mean, what's he won? He's won 5 MVPs with Perth and 2 or 3 championships as well. So I can't see him. It'd be ridiculous for him to go and join Melbourne United or the Tassie Jack Jumpers or something like that. It'd be a complete flip of the script. But it wouldn't be the worst thing. Make the money towards the back end of your career and head over to Japan, similar to what. I guess Mitch Creek's done over the last year. He's headed over to Turkey and bank up that cash before ultimately, retirement comes.
No, definitely, mate. I think he's it's going to be an interesting one. It's a flip of the coin there for sure. Like you said, I think that's a great way of looking at it as well. And I'm looking forward to seeing what it all transpires and everything like that, because it's the $1 million question right now, as much as his contract talk is as well. It's going to be it's going to be tough.
You believe the $2 million offer talks that sort of Mark Arena's been putting out there throughout the season that, we're potentially offering him the largest deal in NBL history, which it would be, which in that case would have to be almost $2 million a season.
Yeah, I'm not sure if the leagues at that point, there's a genuine belief that it could be. This is what I struggle to get my head around. And this is why I don't really like necessarily when we don't know player contracts and everything like that. And I can understand why we don't see them, but I also want to know why, I do want to be able to see what people are getting paid just so we can put a little bit of a scope in terms of where we are around the world. But the way I look at it, the league 10 years ago was bought for $7 million. The Wildcats bought 60% of the team, or Mark Arena bought 60% of the team for $40 million off Hutchie. There could be the chance where $2 million is a genuine thing in the NBL. Do I think he's going to get that? I don't believe so. I think he'll be in that 1.5 to 1.6 bracket there. And that's what he can get in Japan as well. So it's going to come down to, does he want to shift his family and go to Japan, or does he want to stay home in Perth and sort of keep the same lifestyle he's had for nearly the last decade? So it's one that we could sit here all day and criticize, and we could also break down a little bit as well. But it's going to be an interesting one. But we're obviously in the NBL playoffs. Like we said, the last playing game, the seeder or whatever they want to call it, is tonight. And the winner of this game will go on to play the Illawarra Hawks in a 3-game semi-final series. Now, who wins it from here? So the teams that are already locked in is Melbourne United and the Perth Wildcats. They'll be doing battle in a 3-game series. The Illawarra Hawks, like I mentioned, are already locked in. And one of these two teams will be locked in to the NBL playoffs as well. Who wins it and why, mate?
Straight off the top, I'm just going to say Melbourne United and Perth won't win the championship. It'll be one of the 3 that are still left. I think Illawarra have got that offensive side that Melbourne United can't handle. Although we saw that game winner from Illawarra, a month or so ago. To beat Melbourne United in Illawarra, which was a just crazy and phenomenal game. So Melbourne United have shown that they can hold their own against Illawarra, but I don't think they will or can in a 3-game series. If Perth are going to win it, Bryce going to have 40-plus points every single game, and it's going to be tough from that standpoint unless Keanu Pinder does what he did the other night and has 30 and 10 or something like that. So for me, it's Illawarra. It's Illawarra to take it out unless, Southeast can give them a good run for their money in a 3-game semi-final series.
Yeah, I've got no idea, to be fair, mate. I still think if the Wildcats did lose to Southeast Melbourne Phoenix last week in that game at the HPC, I think whoever would have won the Illawarra Hawks Perth Wildcat series would have won the championship. I don't know if Melbourne United have the depth to be able to go with any of these other teams, and they sort of have been flaky. I know they finished second on the ladder, but defensively they're not the greatest, and offensively they haven't been at the standpoint of the Perth Wildcats, Southeast Melbourne Phoenix, or the Illawarra Hawks. Yeah. The Wildcats, I think, are the danger team for the whole NBL. And no shocker, no surprise, and I'm a Wildcats fan. But I think when we get to this point of the year, it's about the superstar talent and the depth to a certain degree as well. And we see it all the time. They've got guys who have the ability to throw 15 points in a flurry. The Elijah Peppers, the Benny Henschels, even the Ty Websters, for example, as well. They've got that depth. But I think you're bang on from a standpoint of the all-around product, and the Illawarra Hawks are that. They've done it all season long. One person that people are forgetting about right now for the Illawarra Hawks is Darius Days. He's had a month off from the team now. He'll be back when it comes to playoff time as well. Massive injection off the bench. He's a guy who can give you 20 and 10 if he needs, or he can do everything else and still give you 10 points as well. So I can't wait to see where this all transpires, and the way every moment matters is the title of the NBL 25 season. This ain't no cupcake league, to reference the great Corey Homicide Williams, mate. There is going to be ebbs and flows galore when we're getting into the playoffs. But last question here, mate. I've absolutely loved having you on, mate. I think it's been incredible just to get perspectives and just to see you firsthand. You're an incredible young man, mate. You've got such a long career ahead of you as well. But the NBL Next Star program's probably been the most influential program in NBL history. It's brought worldwide audiences. It's brought incredible NBA players to its, from the program. We've had the likes of RJ Hampton, Josh Giddey, Alexander Sarr most recently, and obviously NBA All-Star or All-Star snub in LaMelo Ball as well, came over here before his eventual pick 3 in the NBA draft. But what has been your take on the NBL Next Star program? I floated this idea out a few weeks ago about an NBL Next Star draft, and it got a little bit of kickback around the league.
That has taken off in leaps and bounds. I've seen it absolutely everywhere over the last 2 weeks. And I thought, no one's actually tagged you in this. I think apart from Ty Webster, I'm like, Josh should be getting more credit for this.
It was an interesting idea. When Ty ran with it, I was pretty stoked about it. But what are the next steps for the NBL Next Star program? Because I think this year has probably been the quietest it's been since its inception. We've obviously got guys who have returned in Alex Tui, and then obviously had Malik Lewis, Itan Almansa, and then obviously young Kareem Lopez as well, with also Rocco Zakarsky. So what's been your thoughts on the NBL Next Star program as a whole? Where do you see it improving, and what's been your thoughts on the 5 Next Stars this year?
Yeah, it's been phenomenal. I mean, Malik Lewis has been incredible defensively. Josh Giddey said he's going to be one hell of a player when he gets to that NBA level. What's he ranked? I think he's ranked between 55 and 59 in the NBA draft. At the moment, Alex Condon's the highest rated Aussie, projected and predicted to go in sort of that first round of the draft, and Alex Tui between 29 and 35. Alex Tui's been a phenomenal talent for the Sydney Kings. I mean, he's been one of their best 3 players all season. He's been so consistent for them, unlike someone like Jalen Adams, who's been incredibly inconsistent, and I find just incredibly frustrating to watch him and Cam Oliver go to work together. I think Sydney had this year too many of the same type of personalities. They didn't have really anyone who can call out each other's BS, and really be that guy and be that man within a team environment. But yeah, I think the Next Star program and what Liam Santa Maria has done over the last 4 years since its inception has been absolutely phenomenal. I mean, I know Liam pretty well at the moment, and what he's done with that Next Stars program has been incredible. And we've seen someone like Kareem Lopez this year going to New Zealand, first time out of Mexico, and just ball out. And think about it, we've still got another year of Kareem Lopez in the NBL, which is pretty crazy. To think he's almost ready for that NBA level already. Probably just needs to put on, just that little bit more muscle. But he's looking almost good to go. I can't wait to see who Liam sort of got lined up to come out next year. And I mean, when you get someone like Kenny the Jet Smith and Carmelo Anthony on board with the Next Stars program, it's only going to go better from there.
Yeah, it's definitely only getting better and better from there. We saw Karim obviously over at the NBA All-Star Weekend, I believe it was, with Carmelo Anthony and Kenny the Jet Smith, and obviously Dash Daniels, the brother of Dyson Daniels as well, is obviously signed at Melbourne United next year, which is going to be incredible. A massive name, a massive family in Australian basketball, and obviously Dyson's doing his thing over there, mate, and absolutely dominating. But one last question I've got actually here, mate. I've just come off at the top of my head here. Rocco Zikarsky's been the talk of the town, I guess, for the NBL Next Up program. The 7'3" giant with not a lot of muscle, but a lot of potential. Probably hasn't had anywhere near the season that people thought he was going to have after Aaron Baines had obviously left. We thought more minutes, more opportunity, and more production out of Rocco. He's a guy who started the season in the top 20 when he looked at the NBA mock draft. He's now floated to nearly out of the NBA draft board altogether. Do you think he should stay in the NBL for one more season, or is it time to pick up and potentially just go over to the NBA, whether you're playing in the G League, like we've seen Luke Travers, for example, going over there, dominating? I think he had 28 points, 18 rebounds, and 10 assists a couple of days ago. So what are your thoughts on Rocco, and what do you think he should be doing right now at this point of his career?
Yeah, I've spoken to a couple of people in and around Brisbane and the Brisbane Bullets the last few days. I spoke to Darryl McDonald and Justin Schuller, D-Max's assistant coach at Brisbane. Obviously, Justin Schuller, head coach, about 2 weeks into this season. And Justin and D-Mac, they said, look, we need Rocco to come on and have an impact. If he's not having an impact, then obviously, he will be on the bench because we're here to win and we're, not here to do anything else other than compete for a championship, obviously, due to injuries and things like that. That didn't quite work out for Brisbane this season, but Rocco, why not go over to the NBA? You're tall. I think he's got to build that, extra layer of muscle and extra layer of strength. He gets bully balled by, someone like Cam Oliver, who's a little bit shorter than him at the moment. Obviously, Cam Oliver's got a decade of experience on him in that sort of terminology. But yeah, why not? If you're Rocco Zikarsky, give it a crack in the NBA draft. Worst case, you go to G League, and you're a 7-foot giant and could just dominate that, and you'll be back in the NBA the year after.
Definitely, mate. I think it's going to be interesting as well, and. Yeah, I'm excited to see what happens. We've got such an incredible draft crop coming through. Alex Tui is just improving out of sight and obviously getting that, international presence and I guess eyes on him, which he 100% deserves as well. It's a shame that they haven't been able to have the playoff success in which people would have thought that they would have had coming into the season. I think you were bang on when you spoke about the same sort of players. We have a bit of a group chat here at the Basketball Fix, and I spoke about how there was really no hard workers for this team this year. There's obviously plenty of the same play. Like you said, it's an offensive show. There wasn't much defense. I know they were one of the better defensive rated teams in the competition, but I think it was just more the play style that they played was really, really hard to score on, not necessarily the defense that they actually played. So I'm not too sure. Like the most stacked roster in NBL history is out before, we even look at the top 4 teams as well. And obviously D-Ruck's comments, mate, was pretty disappointing as well, where he said he'll walk from Brisbane to Perth if they don't make the NBL playoffs. But, mate, it's been an absolute...
Surprisingly, Gorge took offense to them being called, the most stacked roster in NBL history. Is it fair to call them the most stacked roster? I don't know. I mean, you got Xavier Cooks, Jalen Adams, 2 MVPs in there, and Cam Oliver. So you're pretty stacked. But as far as that goes, Tyler Robertson's just coming out of college. Kelly Leah Pepe's just coming out of college. Alex Tui's a young kid. So you got 4 or 5 young guys in there. Sean Bruce off the benches was phenomenal. He was phenomenal for them this year. They need that extra guard or someone like, that Lamonte Turner that they ultimately couldn't end up getting.
Yeah, I don't understand why you take offense to your team being called the greatest or the deepest team in NBL history. I'm not sure where Gorge is at in his career. Like, does he return next year? I know Olgan put a thing out a couple of days ago saying that there'll be 3 to 4 NBL jobs up for grabs. And I struggle to see 3 to 4 NBL jobs up for grabs unless a guy like Justin Tatum leaves for the NBA. If Mike Wells does not return next season. Like, realistically, when I look at it, and we're not trying to call for people's jobs right here, let's just make that clear off the top, but I see Adelaide's job up for grabs. That's a definite. Obviously, Cairns, I think the job is up for grabs. Adam Ford will not be returning next season. They're the 2 jobs that I see. I think if Josh King wants to return next year, that's his job. Dean Vickerman will never leave Melbourne United now at this point of his career. Scotty Roth will stay there. Yep, so he will definitely, there we go, locked in. He's definitely returning. Then you've obviously got the likes of the Sydney Kings. That's the other job I think is going to be the interesting one. Does Brian Goorjian get another go? He's got another 2 years to run on the deal, but he hasn't got the production out of this team, and there's probably going to be a lot of the players they decide to bring back next year. But I don't know, mate. What are your thoughts? Do you think Gorge returns to the Sydney Kings for NBL 26?
Yeah, I think he definitely does. He'll be there, as long as his contract lasts. I think he's an incredible coach. Everyone has there's this stigma around Gorge since the Olympics that he's a terrible coach. He messes up his rotations. The guy's won that many championships in the NBL and internationally that it is actually absurd to call him a horrendous coach. Yes, he's got some long rotations, but you can see, and in a couple of weeks ago, he was here in Melbourne, and he's sitting there at the presser, and he's just so raw in these press conferences. And it's like he's almost got this thing figured out, and he's almost got this thing clicking. And you can see, I've talked to a couple of people who used to play under, and they're like, he's just holding his head and he's scratching his head. Like, they're like, we can tell he's almost got it figured out. Like, he's just needing like one more piece. And like Gorge said, he couldn't end up getting that one more piece, or and he said it after they lost to Adelaide. We didn't have that guy who we could just throw the ball to and make a play. And Gorge is like it. He's probably had one or two circumstances over the years where he hasn't had that. One of them being that firepower year at the Sydney Kings. You had someone like Brad Rosen who was incredible for them. One guy I know really well, Luke Kendall. Done a lot of stuff with him over the last few years or so, or months or so. And Luke said, look, Gorge has almost got this thing figured out. Like, it's going to click. I think he's going to win 2 championships over the next 3 years with the Sydney Kings, Brian Gorge.
Yeah, massive, mate. That's absolutely huge. And a good sentiment there, I think, as well. A nice little positive outlook on that as well. I think I've been critical of him at times. A lot of people have been very negative about him as well. It's going to be interesting to see, obviously, how he goes the last 2 seasons. But Maxie, mate, thank you so much for coming on today's show. It's been incredible to see your journey from afar, and it's obviously incredible to be somewhat of a small, minuscule part of it as well, mate. You're an incredible young man. You've got such a long journey ahead of you. Everything that you've done, you 100% deserve to have right now, and so much more, mate. So thank you for coming on today's show, mate, and I'm looking forward to keeping in touch.
Thanks so much, Josh. Best luck.
Thanks, mate.